Any takers? Yeah, go ahead.
All right, we'll start out with Group D, and so I'm really just representing some of the, I think, very interesting thoughts that have come up in the group, and try to be as synthetic as possible. We focused very much actually on reading of the work we have been presented with by Valerie and Laurent, especially the movie, even though it was a pity that we weren't able to actually see the two other parts, which would have been very interesting and I think important also in terms of framing our reading of what we were able to see. So what we reflected upon was the question of the idea of flows and movements. Your work is very much marked as problematizing flows between different spaces, different Chinese spaces, but they also circulate, of course, far more widely. And we were really thinking about how to, or about your strategies of thematizing this idea of dislocation, relocation, different spaces, etc. And in a similar vein, we were looking at the film, sort of reading the images and the kind of voice-over soundtrack against each other, right? We were wondering, for example, in this kind of sort of ironic mode, right, of the sort of narrative. At the same time, we had these really very sort of like pleasingly shot images, right, which were, I guess, supposed to be a kind of, for contrast. We were really wondering about the interaction between the process of the process of taking sort of object images from a Chinese context, at the same time thematizing the positionality of your own work, right, with an interest in that, and the kind of consumption or reception in specific spaces and specific level also of economic class. And we were really wondering about your strategy of, at least in the movie, I think of indirection, right, of but also really wondering about, so is this really open for different types of consumption? What does really, in a way, guarantee the critical approach of the public to this film, right? So we were really thinking about these sort of three sides of object, production, and consumption, also in the kind of context of circulation. There were a lot of really good points in my group, so maybe somebody else wants to add and specify.
I think the other question that we had was a question of audience, because we noticed that the film, the voice-over is in English and the subtitle is in French, and so we were wondering, who the intended audience is for this film, and what's the other one? Was there another question that we had? Okay.
So our conversation revolved around a series of fairly simple questions. The first one was it ironic? Which is like sometimes a nice place to start in terms of the film, which is what we spent a lot of time talking about. And it was funny because one member from California asked that question, and then a Chinese member of our group raised very quickly the question of where were the workers' voices in this composition, like that it was clinical was a word that came up a lot. We talked a lot about the style of the film and kind of what sort of ideologies are embedded in that kind of a fixed camera approach to things. And then Ningyin gave a very masterful kind of walk through different sorts of cinematic precedents for the work. It talked about Fritz Lang and Godard and and then Antonioni and his sort of travels through China. And this brought us to basically the very fraught question of the foreigner in China, basically. And of course, because you guys are in Hong Kong, we tried to complicate that by thinking about the foreigner in Hong Kong, then working on China, and all the kinds of intersecting subjectivities and positions that brings up. And then we got from there to like the bigger context of both the Pearl River Delta as a place where most of your work unfolds, and the art world as the place in which it's generally circulated, and to the question of kind of, well, what does this have to do with designing China, and how maybe one connection would be the way that the film kind of looks at the ways in which these workers' lives are essentially designed for them from on high, and that brought us back to Ai Weiwei and the fairy tale project in Kassel, where 1,000 Chinese were basically brought to Kassel in groups, and there was this kind of ironic idea of designing their lives to more or less the same extent that the state would. That's, I don't know, I think that's like a very vague sort of sketch of where things went, but there are probably other people that want to say things. I don't know. No, not really.
Okay, we're Group F. I think Xavier can add a little bit more after we say that. We do have a lot of really similar commentaries as other groups, and we actually started off with some of the projects that you Laurent and Valerie showed earlier. So we're wondering, and then you talked about different details and different goals for individual projects. So we're kind of interested in knowing if you have a certain underlining principle or vision that can link or thread all the different projects together. So so it's kind of easy for us to kind of see if you, I mean, as a designer, how you see the relationship between the territories that you are trying to map out, and then at the same time the relationship with the objects or the people that will be using these designs or these production that you will be designing. So that's in terms of the projects. And in terms of the film, we talked about the monotonous kind of mise en scène that you presented there, and intentional. And at the same time, the void of non-diegetic sound that you mentioned in there. And then we saw this kind of dialectic and almost kind of paradoxical juxtaposition of lack of the subject that you're presenting. So you are to us, you're basically imposing this very strong voiceover subjectivity over the subjects that you are trying to present to us. And I think that's intentional, of course. And unfortunately, we didn't see the other two parts. So we're hoping, and perhaps you can tell us that there will be optimistic kind of progression, and then so we can actually see the connection between the past memories and then future dreams, and then we can actually move towards a so-called the positive capitalism, and being represented later in the two parts. And then also we talked about the objects, and then sort of gendered perhaps in certain ways, and also related to certain classes, because we seem to see only certain groups of certain classes are depicted or are chosen, and maybe it's through editing and also intentional kind of design of the mise en scène itself. So maybe you can help us clarify that. Xavier?
Yeah. About not watching the full movie, it was Elizabeth had this problem as a literary critic of facing a incomplete or partial text, which I think that makes this conversation really interesting, because we are all talking about something that we don't really know, and to what extent all criticism it's in a way like this as well, about incomplete text. So we kind of fantasize a little bit about the movie and about what we thought would be like this irony that it's on the table. If the film kind of it's trying to problematize the idea of the harmonious society and the Hu Jintao project, let's call it, vis-a-vis late capitalism. So let's say that we, on the one hand, we have kind of a modernist tradition that was presented by the voiceover in terms like coming from Fourier, the Marxist, Le Corbusier. And then we have maybe a Chinese tradition of modernity that comes from the Maoist years through the Tan Way. And then we come to nowadays with the idea of the harmonious society in a capitalist, or late capitalist environment. And then we find something like this factory that it's clean and nice and perfect, and everybody seems happy though nobody smiles or laughs. So, and I'm finishing. We raised the question whether of the Communist Party as a designer, as a mass designer of utopian projects, and to what extent we can align the Harmonious Society project with more revolutionary projects. So in that sense, the Communist Party would not be a Latourian designer, but a Promethean designer. And Chan Yunho and what he was talking about, this revolutionary architecture in China, would be a more Latourian architecture, more looking to the details and more nuanced. And in terms of framing the practice of design in the vernacular, so which kind of designer forces we are facing in China? And I think that this factory is a particular good case to evaluate these different designing forces stemming from China.
I would like to see if any of the groups had any reflections on the money that was distributed. Cool, you're on.
Well, this is not a direct response to the money that was distributed, but we did start with looking at the money and wondered what was on it. And we started, actually we congregated in a group that was all Chinese speakers to see if we can conjure some special perspective from this kind of grouping, and kicked out someone who didn't speak English, so apologies on that end. But we looked at the money and started to think about how do we translate positive capitalism into Chinese. And we had a little discussion on that, and I don't know if we actually agreed on one. Because the idea was it a positive, was it aggressive, or was it progressive? How do we choose those wording in Chinese? And was positive capitalism something that emerged from a Chinese perspective that became adopted for the film? Or was this the film producers or makers coined this term themselves? So we were curious about that. And then the discussion evolved into workers, our depiction of workers. And in the film, we talked about a little bit about the representation of workers in the film and how it's very distant, and we can see the movement of workers in the factory, but we don't see their faces, and the dormitory are empty when it's being filmed. So this relationship to workers and their bodies through this kind of documentary does tell us a lot about the perspective the filmmaker is taking. And we talked about also the movement of workers in China and how that's involved, and the identity of workers have changed and may not be addressed by visual arts or literature that we are talking about here. There was one really strong point about the status of workers. How do we understand the status of workers in China and the change that has happened? In the 70s, workers in Danwei was a city construction or fabrication. And you must have some kind of credit to enter this Danwei, which is mostly a city residence. And when the Danwei or factory production moved to the countryside, that changed. And then when new foreign investment came into China to develop factories, that also changed the status of workers. Now, how do we see workers today as creative agents? And that was a question that was raised. How do we identify with workers these days as creative agents or theorists or cultural specialists? I'll stop at that.
We actually wanted to start by posing a question to the two of you. And we just wanted to know if you could reflect a little bit about the decision-making process in Hong Kong, where you were selected to participate in the Venice Biennale.
It was a competition.
That's all?
Yeah,
There was no internal discussion in Hong Kong about it?
It was a competition, an open competition. Anyone can submit a project and we win it.
Who actually made the decision?
It's a art development council that kind of put together a panel that consists of artists, not artists, sorry, curators, artists, policymakers, whatsoever, and just evaluate the different projects.
Thank you. Our discussion, I guess, started with a discussion about the representation of irony in the artwork, and then we started talking about the visual forms that the video represented and how we saw them aligning with forms of, international contemporary art practices, and kind of aligning with a knowledge-based turn in international contemporary art. And then also these notions of irony versus a critical commentary. If the film was trying to produce a critical statement, and that also referenced back to a discussion of a knowledge-based turn in contemporary art practices, where artists increasingly are just putting out or presenting materials and knowledge for people, for the viewer, the audience to go through, and that the intention isn't to make a critical statement, but instead to present material to the audience so that the audience can then go ahead and make a statement. And then in that placement, I think we wanted to try to locate a relationship of the work of MAP office to an international audience and international visual languages that are easily interpreted or legible to an international audience, as opposed to an audience in Hong Kong or an audience in China, and kind of the filtering that happens in that process. But then we also started talking about the international power structures, or the power structures that are inherent within the international art system, and alliances and networks between curators and artists and art historians or theorists.
This is just a small addition regarding the choices in artistic forms. I, for one, saw it almost like an economic minimalism and a form of abstraction that was curious also because I contrasted it with another film about workers and factories in China that we saw last year at SECT, which was almost the opposite in choice, where all the emphasis was on workers' lives, on a kind of, your film once posed the question, where is life? And that film showed where the life was, in the interstices of both at work, outside work, and it was a much more messy picture rather than this aesthetics of abstraction. And we just wondered about that choice and whether you could comment on it, perhaps also in light of the third part on ecology and that whole concept of the positive capitalism that you keep invoking.
Do you remember the title of the film you're referring?
What was the subtitle?
No, the title of the film.
The title of that film. No, we tried to talk in the break, and we couldn't remember it. Yes. Sorry.
Special permit to actually film in a factory, and If I don't know if the film you're referring to is Wang Bing at the west of the rails. I don't know how it's translated.
It's one where they produce eats for the new audience.
No, that's a different one. Now the one I'm thinking of is a 9 hours documentary in 3 parts also. And it was filmed without the consciousness of the factory, so it was actually hidden within the workers to get their trust and to be able to film them in a very intimate and daily, of course, life. So I'm not comparing these two because it's of course like very different, but I was wondering what was your relationship with the actual directors or responsible structure.
I just wanted to pose a couple of quick things. I mean, one is to connect your reflections on highways and their underneath to the remarks made in the last day or so to sort of surface and the underneath of the city, and to have you reflect a bit on that relation. The second is the relation of labor to migrancy, and particularly to container ships. There's been quite a lot of work, indeed artistic work and architectural work, around the use of containers in various sorts of ways, both at the high end. I mean, so in Santa Monica and Venice, in LA, for example, using containers in order to produce multi-million-dollar homes, right? But at the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum, using discarded containers for making homes for the homeless by architects. So somebody like Dick Heptage in California, I mean the subcultures guy, has written rather interestingly and done a series of projects around container homes for... yeah, exactly. And, you know, so, and then somebody like Ursula Biermann, whose work in Switzerland, an artist in Switzerland, has done interesting, made movies around the use of containers, shipping containers, and invisible workers kind of actually shipping themselves off to different places in the world. There was a case of a Russian guy who lived for, I think it was 3 years, in a container in a dockyard in Marseille. And she, in a sense, documented that. That was quite interesting. So I sort of wondered about the relation to that. And then the third is to actually complicate one of your pieces, which is the Ein Hot project in Israel. And just to lay out a bit of the background, I'm not sure that you're aware of it. It certainly didn't come through in the project. Ein Hot was a Palestinian village that was taken over, well, that I think it was Marcel Jarre or Maurice Jarre, a Dadaist in the 50s, established an artist colony, a Jewish person who assumed Israeli citizenship, who established an artist colony in a way by clearing part of Ein Hot, you know, so there's now both a Palestinian village and an Israeli village side by side, although they're both in effect Palestinian villages. The one on top and the other underneath, right? Yeah. So kind of, and so there's a very troubling politics around that establishment that didn't come out in your work, and you seem to be aware of it. So it would be interesting to hear you comment on that.
Thanks for all those comments. Maybe I start with Ein Hot because, yeah, you're perfectly right. We take a bit of shortcuts due to the time limit. But you're right, there is 2 villages in Ein Hot. One is the official artist village that was built up in the 1950s on the spot of an old Palestinian village, Ein Hot.
We have problems of pronunciation.
And few years, I mean, couple of decades after the Palestinians decide to, or been allowed to rebuild another village next hill, basically. And it's only recently that they've, due to the kind of activism of the village, of the mayor of the village and the villagers, they basically get a recognition to be among the first Palestinian village to exist, to be recognized as a Palestinian village. And last year they wanted to, with a group of architects, to build up a festival, art festival, and to bring attention to their village, and not to be in the kind of opposition, but maybe kind of distract the attention of Hein Hod towards Hein Hood. Sorry.
It was also a kind of artistic revenge, since the art community downstairs is mainly kind of art and craft community, not very recognized in Israel. When in Ein Hod, people like Dan Graham, Yona Friedman, Thomas Saraceno were producing projects in the village, and of course get all the media attention. So there was this kind of also artistic battle between the two places.
Yeah, that's why we bring this third element to stop this opposition, which we call the third landscape. On the container, I mean, I go reverse on the list that I put here. On the container side, yes, we're very aware of all the work that has been done around the container. I myself did my degree on architectural degree on container, and the way we look at it is basically the object of the container, and we oftenly compare it to a Pandora's box, as it can contain anything you want, but we have to be careful when we open it, because it's mainly bringing kind of consumers' life. Then we look at that, we look at the container in this way. We also look a lot at the aesthetic of the container. We didn't show, but we have a project we've done in Hong Kong that was called shopping. Shipping being the primary function of Hong Kong port, and represented by the container, and shopping being the ultimate achievement of Hong Kong and all the commercial and commodify activity that's happening at the moment. And then we try to embrace Hong Kong within those two pillars. Then and definitely looking at the aesthetic of the container, it's really important for us. On the image we show, it's essentially, I mean, kind of reconstruction of unstable territory. That's what we wanted to express, and the idea of identity for us with the back home with Baudelaire. And that brings to one of few of you make these comments. Where do we place ourselves? And I mean, the most obvious answer will be that in any situation we are, we'll consider ourselves as kind of misfit. Misfit in France, misfit in maybe in China, misfit in the art world, misfit in the architecture world, and that will probably can be an echo to the comments by Professor Leoli about Wang Hu saying that he's an amateur in opposition to Wang Shu, sorry, in opposition to the professional. In our case, we are not a professional or amateur, but misfit. Means that always on this kind of borderline with this interplay that we are working with. Okay, you want to carry on? Or I continue.
There are a few things. The first, we gave the DVD to one of the participants, yes, that you can keep, and maybe you can, I don't know if some people are interested, to a 50-minute break within the next 10 days. You can still watch it either on your computer, copy it. You can make fake DVDs, no worry. Diffuse it, project it. Because, yeah, I mean, there was part one mainly, whereas the positive capitalism was not in part one, neither in part two, was really starting to be approached, and still with a lot of question mark in part three of the movie. Also, maybe you didn't get this idea of the US dollar, but you can see it at one part of the movie. That's the logo of the factory. It's called Sun Hing. So they use the S and the H. So it's the logo of the factory is a US dollar, and this started to create problems for them 2 years ago. So we were thinking how to solve their problem by putting the US dollar in equity, like the euro and the yen. They are all monies working with equity, and transform then the US dollar into a new currency, which is the R money. How to access the factory? We did in 2003 series of short clips in different type of factories, also to understand other type of production, electronic, leather, or in this case textile. We chose that one for many reasons, but mainly, of course, was the accessibility. The owner of the factory is a father of a very good friend. She's an artist. She belongs to the art community in Hong Kong, and this facilitated a lot our venue. And we spent somehow in and out 5 years in the factory. When we go there, we are part of a family. Somehow we can sleep there. We can take our camera at midnight and go in different areas. You will see in the live part there's a lot of activities at night, karaoke parties, etc., dance. That will bring the smile back to the workers' face. I mean, we didn't stay remote to the workers. In work, it's mainly the worker as a machine, but then in life, the worker takes back his role as an individual.
On the comments from the group that try to define what is positive capitalism in China. I think you're asking us where is basically our standpoint, and it's obvious that we are not Chinese. I mean, you can tell, and also we do not speak a Chinese language, neither Cantonese or Mandarin and. Then one of the strategy, and that's follow up on this misfit situation. We are what I don't know if some of you speak Cantonese, but we are Guelos. Guelos is for the foreigner, the word for the foreigner, but also means the white phantom. And what's happened is, and you can see in the film, that basically we're not existing. People can pass in front of a camera, they never look at us. Because at one point we pretend and we like this idea that we are becoming invisible, and that means that basically also invisible works in two ways. We are not voyeur either. I mean, I'm not interested. We're not interested to go too deeply or too precisely on the face. I mean, at the contrary of Ming Ying film, when she's filming close-up faces. I mean, it's something that we are not interested in that. Then there is always a distance and this level of invisibility from our side. Then, I mean, we can say that. I mean, one way to look at it is maybe we're not engaging enough. The other possibility is we just look at the surface, and that's bring back to your third point about the surface and the underneath. Basically, in this case, the surface can be also with a bit of thickness, and I mean that's what we call in one project the thin pattern. Thin in opposition to thick. means that it's a sickness that is built with motif, with addition of motif of patterns, basically. And one point that also we try to always look at in both in the theme or in our approach to what we observe is this, to highlight this notion of lightness, what we call, and not only us, but other design theorists, the light modernity. It means that we observe, we look at, we even have kind of intervention, but at the end there is no traces left. We leave, and there is nothing that can prove anything from our passage, except that the experience that we personally, like you may say, steal. The one comment on the opposition between city of production and city of consumption is very interesting, because we had one project a couple of years before that was called China Double Face, and we had two themes. One was called City of Production, and the other one was called City of Consumption. And we were like opposing them, but that could be another story. But I think there is something interesting around this idea. Maybe I stop. I don't know if I answered all the comments or addressed all the comments.
We probably need to answer, but let me ask one final question. I'd like to ask comment maybe on the first part of your presentation where you were showing projects. And it seems to me that you have these, a number of key terms you always use, like mapping, and then this idea of visualizing the invisible, and so on and so forth. And I think what, for me, is interesting about that is that you seem to be working at the interstices of two notions of design. One notion of design would be design as resulting in a finished product, right? And the other notion would be what we might call design as event, right? It's something that happens, that takes place. And if you think about design as event, then one of the key problems there is how you're going to notate it, right? I mean, and this is true, for example, about installations, performance arts, dance, and so on and so on. Right? I mean, the whole issue of notation. That's true, of course, of music as well. Right? I mean, you have the music that goes, and how you're going to notate it, which at another level is a question of how you can remember it, right? How you can repeat it. So, all these issues that I think came out in previous discussions about design and memory. Right, would probably come back in some of the things you do in relationship to these sort of two probably quite different possibilities of what design could be. Design as object and design as event. It's a comment. I mean, you could respond or not respond.
We could call it design of events, but I would prefer call it design of experience.
Right.
And this links with the laboratory idea. Right. Laboratory and experience, yes. I think it's more appropriate and pretends somehow to be scientific. Which is
also what Laurent was talking about, I think. Okay. Shall we? Are there any more comments or questions? If not, let's break for lunch.